Your office is down in Fort Pierce, right, at the center, and they have, that's where John Odom always had the Cattleya Symposium, was at that facility. Anybody ever go to that? John Odom, you all know John Odom, right?
Yeah.
Odom's Orchids, right?
Yeah.
So he used to run a Cattleya Symposium pre-COVID. It was really a great meeting. We'd have 120 people there, some huge crowd, and there were Cattleya experts from all over the world. So it was really, really fun. Anyway, I digress. And then I'm also a partner with Fairchild Tropical Botanic Gardens. Fairchild is in Miami in Coral Gables, and they have something called the Million Orchid Project. Has anybody heard of that? How many Million Orchid Projects? Okay. So I have my own version of that. I call it the 100,000 Orchid Project. So it's like in Broward County. I met Jason almost 10 years. Jason Downing is the orchid biologist who's in charge of the Million Orchid Project. And I met him almost 10 years ago, and I said, hey, I really want to do this in Broward County. And there were a lot of reasons why he couldn't do it. So he said, you have to go and find seed, collect seed, and then we'll propagate them. And then you can do a Million Orchid Project in Broward County. So that's what I did. I started collecting seed, and the Encyclia Tempensis seedlings that we have now out on the table are actually from seeds that I collected in, I think we're probably up to 2019 now. So it's a very long game, takes a long time, but that's what makes it fun. So we're going to talk about native orchids. All the orchids we have here today are native orchids, and there's a wide variety. You can see I brought in some show and tell stuff here, and you can see just all kinds of different morphology, all different shapes and sizes and colors. We're going to talk about orchid life cycle. Now, if I stand here, you guys can't see, and if I stand over there, they can't see. So this is going to, well, I'll try to move around. So we're going to talk about the orchid life cycle, because when you're talking about native plants, it's good to understand how they grow. Then we're going to talk about orchids. Then we're going to talk about conservation, and actually it might be in a different order than that, I'm not sure. And then I'll share a couple of tools with you that I use that you might want to learn about if you don't already know. So the life cycle of orchids. So orchids in general, okay, now what did I just do? There we go. So this is just kind of the high overview of orchids. They are a very, very successful family. 800 genera plus or minus 28,000 species, depending on who some people say 30, some people say 29. There's taxonomists that are always trying to redefine things, so it changes a lot. But there's a lot of different orchids all over the world. This is the Encyclia Tempensis that you all probably know and love. This is the butterfly orchid, they call it, and it's the most common native orchid here in Broward County, or in South Florida. This is a semi-alba form, so there's no coloring in the petals or the sepals, but there is coloring in the lip. We brought one alba form that somebody was lucky enough to get. And the albas are clear, both in the petals and the sepals, and also in the lip. So there's no purple striping in the lip. So that's kind of fun. They grow everywhere. They grow everywhere except Antarctica. There's some that live underground in the desert. There's a movie that somebody made about the orchids up in northern Canada along the Arctic Circle, and they're popping up through the snow. So they really do grow everywhere. In Florida here, the southern part of this, well, I'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't really need this PowerPoint. I could just do the whole talk. Let's start with life cycle, though. That's where we're at. So we're going to talk about how orchids work, like from a sort of botanical point of view. And I'm going to pass around some seeds, so you can look and see seed. Hold on. So, orchid seeds are really cool. So they make like little capsules like this. Have you seen these on your orchid before, right? So that means you've got local pollinators, and there's a local pollinator moves from one flower to another flower, and doing pollination, getting pollen from one plant onto the stigmatic surface of another. But most people, so everybody's seen these, but most people haven't really looked at seed before. So I'm going to just pass these around. So on the black things, what do you see here? Like a sheet of black paper, right? But look really carefully, and there's seeds on it. And similarly here's 1,000 seeds for you. Here's the little, you get the honorary longest number here. This is from a Vanda. This is Vanda seed. So you can just pass these around and kind of take a look and see. So inside the baggies, on the walls of the baggies, all the little specks are orchid seeds. So when we get to seeds, you'll see how that all works.
What can we do with the pods when we have these?
With seed pods, I will tell you that later in the talk.
Okay, good.
The question is, what can I do with a seed pod? And I will tell you a place where you can send them. And they will, send you a flask of plants back for free in about 2 years. So we're going to start with pollination. You have to start somewhere. It's like a chicken and egg problem. But so pollination, as I said, pollen is distributed from one flower to another flower. There are many different pollinators that are involved with orchids. Bees are pretty typical pollinators in Florida. But there's moths, there's hummingbirds, the sequoia, which is a native that we'll look at. This is an expired sequoia here. Those are pollinated by hummingbirds. And there's lots of orchids that are pollinated by moths. A lot of the night blooming things, the brassavolas and orchids like that are pollinated by moths. So there are lots of different pollinators, some ants even. And there's lots of different strategies. It's what?
You didn't say butterflies.
Butterflies, yeah. I'm actually not sure that there are butterflies that pollinate orchids.
All right.
If I'm trying to think if I've ever seen an article. Has anybody ever seen a butterfly like on an orchid? On an epidendrum? Okay. It's probably not a native epidendrum, right? It was like epidendrum radicans or something like that? Yeah, so it's probably a confused butterfly. But it's a non-native plant. They didn't know what to do with it, right?
Well, said in fact you're on pollination.
It's what?
Is that true that on the vanilla plant we have to hand pollinate?
Yeah, so the question is for vanilla, do you need to hand pollinate? And the answer is yes. In Florida here, there's no native pollinators. There are native pollinators in Mexico, which is where vanilla came from. Sort of, it's really Mesoamerican. But here we don't have native pollinators, so we need to pollinate by hand. Yeah. So if you're looking for vanilla beans from your vanilla plants, you need to go out and learn how to pollinate. That's another workshop. Buy some of the vanillas we have, plant them, and then in 5 years we'll come back and we'll do a pollination. Yeah, right. How to make a vanilla bean workshop, you know? So anyway, pollination strategies, you've sort of seen this stuff before maybe. Orchids and insects co-evolve so that there are many species of insects and species of orchids that have one-to-one relationships. And Darwin wrote a whole book about this. Darwin's second book, after The Origin of Species, was actually a book about orchids and orchid pollination and how insects and orchids have co-evolved. And an example is this picture here, where you've got two things that sort of look alike. And the top picture is an orchid. And it actually looks like a female bee. This is the male bee down here. And the poor male bee is trying to have fun with the flower, thinking it's a female bee. So that plant, and there are also pollinators that are attracted to things that smell like really foul. You know, you think about carrion or poop, fecal matter, you know, what's always swarming around flies, right, flies. So flies are pollinators. Bulbophyllum, there you go. Bill Toms, right? Have you had Bill here? Bill Toms is a great talk, great speaker. And he named some of his plants like adorable upwind, because you want to say upwind of them, you know, you don't want to be downwind from his plants. So pollination is a complex subject with orchids. The conservation implication is that when you're looking at an ecosystem and thinking about doing a restoration project or even introducing an orchid into a new area, you need to think about the pollinators, because if the pollinators aren't there, you can have the flowers succeed, but they'll never grow, they won't make babies because there's no pollinators. Yeah. So it's kind of important. So fruiting, so after it gets pollinated, the flowers set fruit, and the botanists call it fruit, the little seed pods, seed capsules, they call fruits. And this is, see if I go over here so the other people can see, then I'm going to be messing up the cable here. Maybe this will work better.
It's nice and long.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I know, it's like, does this work better if I'm over here? Because then you guys can't see or you can't see. So the fruit, like this guy, that once it's pollinated, the flower usually stays on for a long time, but it kind of shrivels up to tell the pollinators, don't mess with me because I'm already pregnant, you know. So it swells up, There's a chart that American Orchid Society has about how long it takes for the seed to mature in the capsule. So it varies from like 120 days to about 190 days. So if you're doing process, you need to be aware of the maturity time. And you can find that from AOS. And this is a pot that's just forming here. And you can see the flower is still on it. That was a dendrobium that a friend gave me. And then that's probably just some Tampensis over there. Okay, seeds, my favorite things. So the seeds are so cool. So this is a kind of normal monocot seed. So if you think about like a pea or a piece of corn or a radish seed or something like that, it's got a shell, but then inside it's got like soft, squishy, sweet stuff, right? And that soft, squishy, sweet stuff many times is what we find attractive about vegetables when we eat them. But that stuff is called endosperm, and it's actually food for the seedling. So when that seed sprouts, it puts on a root, sends up a leaf, and the food that's in the seed, the endosperm, is food for the seedling. Orchids have no endosperm. This is an electron microscope view of an orchid seed, and you can see it's tiny. It's 1 millimeter, which is like really, really tiny. You can see by the ones you've passed around how small they are, and they're basically air. There's a cell wall around the seed. It's usually a seed wall, usually 2 cells wide. It's like just 2 cells. And then the seed, so to speak, the DNA for the actual plant is that thing, the nucleus. So they have about 80 to 90% air inside those seeds. So even how small they are, they're mostly air. And what that means is that they're typically dispersed by wind. So you get a pod like this, a fruit like this. It matures, goes through that maturation time we talked about. And when it gets fully mature, it will do what's called dehissing, which is it turns brown. It splits along these seams, and the seeds just kind of float away. They don't fall to the ground. They actually float in the wind. And so it's very, very cool. And that's generally how they're dispersed. Okay. So once you have the seed, what do you have to do to get a plant? Well, you need it to germinate, right? So germination is the next step. So like all things with orchids, it's complicated. It's never simple with orchids. So for an orchid seed to germinate, I already said there's no endosperm, right? So there's no food for it. So it's kind of inert. When it lands wherever it lands, it's just going to sit there. And what an orchid seed needs to germinate is it needs to be kind of invaded by a mycorrhizal fungi. So there's probably, I think I read 400 different varieties of mycorrhizal fungi. So it needs to land somewhere where the correct mycorrhizal fungi is living. Then the fungus invades the seed, puts in these sort of tube kinds of things, and starts pumping carbon and nitrogen into it. And then that triggers the germination process in the orchid seed. So this is another level of complexity that shows you how rich and complex an environment these plants need to live in. So that's how they get germinated. When they do germinate, though, they don't start the way that a typical plant does. They don't throw up a stem and throw down a root. They start to form something called a protocorm. And this is a picture of the Encyclia tampensis protocorms, as it happens. And these are just undifferentiated blobs of biomass. They're like green blobs of plant matter. There's no leaves, there's no roots. And they grow to about typically the size of a BB, sometimes smaller, sometimes larger, but around, if you think of the size of a BB, that gives you the idea of how big they get. So they'll grow like this for 3 to 9 months, maybe, depends on the plant, and then they'll finally do what's called differentiation, where they start to put down roots and start to throw up a leaf, or at least a suitable. If anyone has any questions as we're going along, just feel free, because there's a lot of material here. So this is a picture of the recruits. So once they start to go, seedlings in the lab we call seedlings. Seedlings in the wild we call recruits. And so this is a picture of some recruits. These little guys here are actually baby orchids. Okay. This whole thing is a water hyacinth. Anybody here grow water hyacinth? Anybody here know that water hyacinth is the most deadly, feared, terrible aquatic pest, invasive plant in the state?
Yes.
It's like illegal to have this, it's illegal to touch this, it's illegal to talk about this, it's like highly illegal to do anything with this plant. I didn't know that. I plead not guilty. I'll show you a picture of that later on of a rescue that we did where there was a swimming pool full of water hyacinth with hundreds of orchids in it. And the first time I went there, I just grabbed a big thing full and took it home with me. So lock me up here, lock me up. But so these are really cool because this is the only time ever. You see the little thing right down there? See the little, at the base of it? It's a little ball. That's the protocorm. That's actually the protocorm. And this is the only time I've ever seen protocorms. I mean, I've been in Flackahachie, I've been in all the swamps, and I've looked, and this is the only time I ever saw a protocorm was in the swimming pool. So it's pretty fun. Okay, and so so that gets us through the whole sort of cycle. And this, as you can see, it kind of shows how things work in nature. This is on an oak tree over on the west coast. And this is Encyclia tempensis. And there's a big, huge, what I always call the mothership. There's a big, huge plant right here. And so that's been fruiting, setting seed. And then if you kind of look down the branch, you see babies that have come off of the seed from this and they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's, 40 or 50 years of growth probably. And just each generation, it's a little bit further down the branch and the plant's a little smaller, and as time goes by, they all get bigger. And it will end up covering that whole branch. We have some in Fort Lauderdale that the branches are just completely covered. I'll show a picture of that in a while. But that's kind of how it grows. And so the live oak and Encyclia tempensis are really a matched pair because the mycorrhizal fungi that the tempensis need lives in the live oak tree. So if you have live oak trees, that's a good sign, a good leading indicator to find tempensis. And another sort of signal is the resurrection fern. So the resurrection fern is a fern that grows in live oak, and it turns out that it needs the same mycorrhizal fungi for its life process that tempensis does. So when you have resurrection fern in an oak tree, it's a great place to put Encyclia tempensis. So that all what I showed you is how it works in nature. In the lab, it's a little bit different, as you might imagine. And these are some pictures that I took at various points down at Fairchild. This is a chart from Fairchild that talks about sort of you start with a fruit, right? You start with one of these. And then working in a laminar flow hood in a sterile environment, you're going to be doing flasking in flasks like this. And so you start off by putting in seed, that's called the mother flask. And basically you grow the seed out in a flask like this until you get protocorms. And then you take the protocorms and distribute them. And then as they differentiate, start to have more growth, you replay. So this kind of shows the progression. And from one fruit, you can really get thousands and thousands of orchids. Yes, ma'am?
How about the bottom part of the plastic container?
How about the what?
The bottom of the container.
Oh, what's on the bottom of the container? Okay, that's a good question. So this is an agar kind of, it's like a jelly kind of thing.
The growth hormone?
Pardon?
Growth hormone? Like a growth hormone?
Yeah, they have growth hormones, right. So there are different formulas. There's a lot of literature, like basically not every plant, but many plants have protocols now that talk about what to put in the agar. So you can, and there are germination mixes, so there are formulas that work particularly well to make germination. And then you transplant them out of the germination onto a growth so that you would have more growth hormones and stuff like that. And so it's different, but it's different for different species. You can use different formulas. There's labs where you can buy this stuff, or you can get recipes and make your own. Okay. And you can end up with thousands and thousands and thousands of plants from very, very few seeds. But it's not expensive in the beginning because, you know, you can have 5,000 protoforms or something crazy like that in a jar like this. But then by the time you blow it all out here, you know, you've got a lot of cost. You've got time, because it's taking time, so you've got a time factor here. But you've also got a lot of cost in the material, and all this work, all the transplanting is being done under a laminar flow hood. So it's all sterile, and that's expensive as well. So whether you do it here or you do it outside the country, it's still expensive. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of botany, basics of how they work. So then I'm going to talk a little bit about conservation, and then I'm going to talk about orchids of Florida and this area. Okay, so that's kind of the last two things. So any questions about all that before I go on? Because this I've built on that. No, good.
How long would you keep that in the plastic?
Okay, so this needs to come out. Okay, so this is, the date on here is 1/22. So these plants have been in here for about a year, almost a year and a half now. When I got them, so I got this from Fairchild. I always like to have a flask for show and tell. So I asked them for a flask. And so when I got them, they were about this big. They were just tiny. So they had just been put into this flask. And I can send this around if you want to look closer. You can see some little protoforms, so I'm going to pass it around. If you want to just pass that around and take a look at it. But that should really come out. I just need to get another new flask. Next time I'm down there, I'll probably try to get a new little flask, and I'll take those out and deflask them. Then grow them out. Okay? So conservation. So we're going to talk about conservation. So why do we need to worry about conservation? We need to worry about conservation because orchids are disappearing. Orchids are disappearing everywhere. It's not just South Florida. It's not just the United States. It's like everywhere in the world. Orchids are threatened. We had a year at the Orchid Society of Fort Lauderdale where just coincidentally we had 3 different speakers over the course of the year that talked about that one was in Colombia, one was Brazil, and one was Tasmania. And so we had people talking about the orchids of those areas, and they all had pictures of how it was 30 years ago and how it was today. And it's exactly the same as here. It's exactly the same. You think, Tasmania, wow, that's wild and crazy, but the only orchids they have left now, the island used to be covered with orchids. The only ones they have now are in parks. Okay, they're just basically wiped out everywhere else. Brazil, you know, I'm sure some of you know Miranda, and you know, the coastal dunes used to be full of orchids, all those cattleyas that grow along the coast, the intermediates and stuff like that. And now it's all condos. You know, it's all been paved over, it's all condos. And same thing in, you know, South America. So it's everywhere. So habitat loss is probably like number one. What's going on? And what's going on up here? Do we have any development pressure in St. Lucie County? No, probably not, right? Nobody wants to take any of that farmland and build houses on it, right? But farmland, I mean, even farmland though, is really like habitat loss, you know. And we'll look at a map, actually, when we kind of drill down into your county, we'll look at a map, but habitat loss happens. So this is a really famous old picture of a cart. This was from the turn of the century. They go into the Everglades and just fill up these carts with, and they pulled out thousands and thousands of orchids that they would ship up to New York. And so that's really poaching, that's overcollection. And these are actually, that's the tricho, that's right there. We have a bunch of them on the table. This is epidendrum, and this is the Pseudopodium punctatum. So we have two out of those 3 orchids here today. But poaching is a real issue. It's I've had plants stolen. I've been doing installations around Broward County for 5 years now, and some of the plants that we put out have been stolen. We put them in, they grow, they bloom, and then they get stolen. So it's like you say, oh, it's terrible. But I'd rather they steal like plants that I put out than they go out to the Everglades and steal plants from the Everglades, you know? So it's a mixed bag. I don't like it when it happens. Habitat, again, fragmentation, succession. Climate change is an issue. Climate change works kind of both ways because the plant zones are kind of shifting, and there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of research being done in the botanical world these days on how plants are adapting, how animals are adapting. And so we're doing some experiments actually with orchids, and some of the orchids that we have here are not native to Broward County, not native to here, but Fairchild thinks, Dr. Downing thinks that with the warming trends that we're getting, the plants that were restricted to really the southernmost part of the state should begin to do well further north. So we have a project going in Davie, Florida with the USDA invasive plant people actually to study that. Invasive plants are an issue. You know, if you have an oak tree and it's all covered with you know, monstera or philodendron or pothos, whatever you call it, that will smother the resurrection fern, that will smother the native orchids. And that has happened, I know. And then the air quality matters too, because air is very important in air movement. So those are all the different things that are happening. So and what are the benefits? So like, why do you bother? Biodiversity isn't a big thing. Orchids are, because of the complexity of the sort of the growing cycle that we've talked about and seen already, they're a really wonderful kind of canary in the coal mine. If your orchids are struggling, you know that something's wrong in your environment. But if they're doing well, then you're doing pretty well with your environment there. There are a lot of beneficial uses to orchids. Obviously, vanilla is good. In Chinese culture, there's a lot of medicinal uses for orchids. And it's kind of like the Western medical community doesn't think very much of it, but it's been used for a long, long time over there. It's part of many cultures. It's an ecosystem we said before. If you're saving, you know, if you're working on saving orchids, you're probably looking at the whole picture. You're looking at, you know, at habitat preservation, looking at water, all those kinds of things. So there's good side effects. And then actually ecotourism is a big thing. And you know, we have orchid shows, we have, you know, nurseries that people like to visit. We have boat rides. I don't know what you do up here, but in Florida, I mean, in Fort Lauderdale, you know, there's boat rides that people go on and stuff. And if you've got orchids in your trees, it makes for a better experience all around. So there's a lot of reasons to try to keep these plants going. And these are all Tempensis, all Encyclic Tempensis, the pictures, just different color forms. And this one is the alba that I was talking about, where there's no coloring in the lip. The lip is perfectly clear. So conservation progress. So what's going on with it? How's it working? Well, these are just some pictures of stuff that we've done working with Million Orchid Project. We typically do, I do about 10, I would say, big projects a year. We're working with homeowners associations or arboretums or parks and rec departments, people like that, and typically putting in 300, 400, 500 orchids. So we work over the course of the summer. We train whoever the installers are, and then sort of periodically deliver plants to them. This is just a group of volunteers doing an installation. This is a different group. This is Jason Downing, actually. He's the guy from Fairchild, the biologist in charge of the Million Orchid Project, giving a lecture a couple of years ago at Stunson Nature Trail in Ackerman Park. Like I said, yeah, Million Orchid Project, they're halfway to their goal. So they've put about 500,000 orchids in around Miami-Dade County, which is pretty good. I can't take that, I'm sorry. And then, like I said, it's 12,000 so far in Broward County. My goal is 100. If I can do that before I die, I'll be happy.
Are you putting it on public land or private land?
Both. So some of it is in parks. You know, we work with cities. Oakland Park, City of Oakland Park has a nature trail that's called Stunson Nature Trail. It's a quarter-mile trail, all native plants. And we put probably, I don't know, 1,000 orchids into there or something. It's really spectacular. Most neighborhoods, it's like 300 to 400, something like that. And we tend to do it in stages, so we'll work with a neighborhood for like 3 years. So we get people trained, and then the next summer go back and do it again. And it goes faster, it's higher quality, better survival rates. So it's good, you know, you get better with practice. So it's, yeah, like that. Okay, so this stuff sort of, we've talked about some of this stuff already, habitat management. So these are kind of strategies for conservation. And, you know, habitat, like saving the habitat, like you guys are probably seeing your farm areas under attack. So, you know, if you're fighting that and trying to keep that land open, then you're doing this. You're trying to manage the habitat, trying to keep pollinators out there, keep the fungus diversity that they need, preserve the green spaces. Propagation and translocation, that's sort of what I've been doing, where I'm growing plants and then going into areas and putting them back in where they used to be. So it's not so much, some of it is new, but it's mostly putting stuff back in that's gotten chopped down. Who's doing it? Native plant societies and orchid societies. Y'all can provide some leadership here, work with your local universities, local nurseries, and get stuff out there. And then citizen science is actually a really important part of this. And there's a tool called iNaturalist that I'm going to show you some screen grabs of in just a second. Does anybody yet use iNaturalist here? Anybody ever heard of that? No. So iNaturalist is an app that you can get for your phone. Came out of, I think, MIT. And it uses AI, uses artificial intelligence to identify plants, actually identify anything for you. Animals, bugs, butterflies, you know, mammals, fish, snakes, plants. So I'm interested in plants. So you take a picture of them, you load the app on your phone, take a picture, and then submit it to iNaturalist and say, what is it? And it will tell you with varying degrees of confidence. It'll say, oh, we're not really sure, but it's probably in the genus of blah, you know? Or it will say, this is what it is. If it makes a positive ID, it will do that. Once it sort of knows that and you submit it, you're putting it out in the world. And out in the world, there are lots of people that are looking at this data as it's coming in. There are scientists that are using this data. There's botanists that are using this data. There are hobbyists that are using this data. And to get the highest level in iNaturalist, a couple of other people have to approve the identification. So it's not just you saying something, it's a couple of other people also confirming that yes, indeed, this is this plant. So we have this plant in this environment. And I'll show you some stuff from that that's pretty neat in just a second. Okay, so one of the things this is another sort of strategy for, you know, people, local orchid societies, etc. Has anybody here been involved with rescues? Has anybody here actually like saved orchids? Because that's, okay, here, what did you do? Tell me what you did.
Oh, when I think they're dead, I save them and they come back from now like 6 or 8 months later.
Okay, your own plants or plants from your own plants? Okay, that's a rescue of a type, right. Somebody over here did a rescue? Yeah? What's yours, how did you do? What did you do?
It was actually from Home Depot, and it was in their throwaway pile.
Ah, okay, another similar story. Okay, these are domestic plants being saved, okay? I'm really talking about wild plants, okay? Stuff that's, and this is, oh yeah, okay.
I have a bunch of native orchids that a friend of mine gave me. And he can take you to places to find them.
Yeah.
He hasn't taken any out.
Okay.
He doesn't poach.
Right.
But you can take you around to the woods and
Cool.
whatnot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
see them.
Okay. Well, the rescues, I have 2 rescue stories I'm going to tell you about. So do you remember the Hobbin area, the one with where we could see the protocorms? So this was the swimming pool. And this swimming pool was full. This is sort of the after picture, but this swimming pool was full of water hyacinth with this beautiful orchid growing all the way through it. And this is a picture of the plant, one of the plants that I pulled out of there, that I grew at my house. And so that's what it was. It's a Habanero repens. It has been found in iNaturalist. It is in St. Lucie County. But that's sort of like a pretty esoteric save. It was really disgusting and gross. There were snakes in there. The water, it's a really deep pool. There was a diving board on the end, so it was like 12 feet deep. And if you stepped over the edge, you'd like to slip down into the slime and stuff. It was really gross and disgusting, both. But I got 10 of my best friends that they used to be, you know. And we pulled out about 300 orchids, and we spread them out to as many places as you could find. And it's sort of, was a challenge, because if you go to the water management district or you go to a park, you say, oh, I have these orchids, would you like to put them into your wetlands? And they go like, well, where did they come from? They said, well, it came from a swimming pool full of water hyacinth. If you're a water manager, if you're managing an aquatic park, and somebody comes and says anything about water hyacinth, what are you going to say? You know? No. So there were many, many challenges on this project, but there are, to my knowledge, live orchids in 5 different places as a result of this project. So that was a
Can I
success.
ask a question?
Yeah.
When you take plants from a location, where do you put them back at?
Okay, so the question is, when you take plants from a location, where
County, so where did they end up?
those ended up at in botanical gardens like wildlife areas, water. There's a term I'm looking for that I'm getting a senior moment. I don't know. But
Different counties, you mean?
yeah, different counties. Yeah, actually, different counties, different towns, right? And it's just really having a network of people. I know a lot of conservation people. I know people at the Water Management District. I know a lot of people. And so it's just, you kind of call around and say, hey, I've got this. Are you interested? And find stuff. And then this is actually 2 different rescues, but this is they're both oak trees. So this is an oak tree in my neighborhood that got chopped down. And I actually had a permit. So to collect seed from the wild, you need to have permits. You can't just go out and grab a seed pod from an orchid. You actually need to have a permit to do that. And so I had a permit to collect seed from this tree. I knew the homeowner, and it had a huge colony on it, and I collected seed there 3 years in a row, and then that happened to the tree, so I couldn't get any more seed. But I did save orchids, and when I do that, then I would take them on other restoration projects with me when I'm going to neighborhoods and stuff, and I will tie them up and mount them, and the survival rate on them is very, very good. And then this is just another tray, and you can see all the resurrection fern, but here's the Tampensis here, there's some Tampensis here, Tampensis, another one up here, little guy. So that was a city thing, where the city was cutting down some trees, and I did a map, and I got permission and stuff to save them. So those, the question is, where do you put them? So there we were working with the city government, and we took them from this one place where they were being chopped down and put them into other city parks.
Are they mostly oak trees that were being?
Yeah, these are oak. I've done also like rescues from slash pine. So we have a lot of Tampensis that grows in slash pine. And so those are also really easy to
Our HOA is
save.
taking out a lot of oaks, and I'm just Florida oaks, and I'm wondering if that would
Go
be
and-
anything that you would be interested in.
Go and look. Yeah, go and look and see if you can find any Tampensis.
They took down
So-
100 people from us.
This is Tampensis. This is what it looks like growing up in the trees.
I didn't see
Okay,
it.
so this is what you're looking for. This is a piece that fell down in my neighborhood a few years, well, like 4 years ago probably. It's in spike now, you can see the flower spikes, but this is a nice, big, mature Encyclia Tampensis. So this is what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cut down 100
Did you
people
say you
from
have
out
to have a
of
permit?
Yeah.
To collect from the wild, you need to have a permit.
If tree falls down in someone's yard.
If somebody's, yeah, actually, I have I think the next slide is talking about that. So, yeah, exactly, right, there it is. So, yeah, the rule number 1 is like save the plants. Okay, so don't get bogged down in permits and legalities and stuff, save the plants.
So from whom do you get a permit?
This lady right here, Patty Anderson, Dr. Patty. Everybody calls her Dr. Patty. Okay, Patty Anderson at fdax.gov. She's like the most responsive state employee in the world. She's awesome. She's great. So if you are if a tree comes down in your neighbor's yard, if they're cutting something down, and you go over and you save the plants and you tie them up in your tree, you don't need a permit for that. Okay, I'm talking about like if you want to go out into the swamp and collect some seed, or if you're going into a park, you need to have permission of the park manager and the state. So that's only if you're collecting from the wild. If you're doing a rescue locally, you don't really need a permit as long as you're not selling them. If you're selling them, you're in a whole different, different can of worms. But in general, you can do rescues on your own, save the plants. My kind of what I've learned is save the plants. reach out to, your friends, call your friends in the Orchid Society and say, hey, do you know this? Do you know anybody that knows anything that could help us? Do some research, do a test run. If you have the luxury, I mean, try to figure out what you're going to do and see if it works before you have to do it for all of them. And sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't. This is really important. Save as much substrate as you can, like save as much, if it's on bark, save as much of the bark as you can, keep the roots intact. If it's a terrestrial, dig up as much of the soil around it as you possibly can. Don't just dig up a little bit. There was a big project up in Ocala with Sequoia lanceolata, which is this beautiful thing. But they did a bunch of rescues up there, and that was one of their lessons, is just take a huge amount of dirt off with you. So anyway, and then share. Spread them out once you got it. Okay, and then propagation, so this sort of fits in here maybe, but I told you I would tell you where you could go and get a seed pod flask. And so this is, if you're interested in doing that, the company that I use is Myers Conservancy, and it's troymyers.com. And Troy is out in the state of Washington, and if you send him a picture and a seed, he likes dry seed, not seed pods, but dry seed, he'll actually flask them up for you, and he'll give you the first flask, so for free. And he will sell the rest. You can buy more flasks from him if you want, or he will sell, he has a website and he sells the other flasks that he makes from your seeds. So that's his business. But if you want to fool around with it, and it's fun, and it's free, why not, So that's a really good source. Otherwise, yeah, all these things. You just have to be really patient if you're going to start from seed. This is another success story. This is in Cyclia tampensis down in Hollywood, and it's from a project we did in like 2015, I think. Yeah, it's the 100th anniversary of Broward County, so they had all these Broward 100 events. So we got 100 in Cyclia tampensis and did a workshop one weekend down in the river, and we gave them away to homeowners and told them how to grow them. And this is somebody in Hollywood that got one of them, and last year she had like 22 seed pods or something, 23 seed pods. And so that's, 5,000, okay, I'm running out of time. That's like 5,000, that's lots and lots of seeds. Okay, so I'm running out of time here. So you're gonna get a short view of orchids. Florida, lots of orchids. St. Lucie region, okay, so this is from a talk I gave a while ago, District 10 of the Garden Association, all of these counties. Okay, in Florida, we had 100 plus species. In that region, okay, so St. Lucie's up here. In this whole region, there's 36 species. Okay, so there's a lot of other orchids that grow in other parts of the state. Now, if you go down to St. Lucie, yeah, if we come into St. Lucie, right here, there's an herbarium, 16 orchids. So in your county, there's only 16 different species listed in the herbarium. And this is sort of the historical record. Then if you go to iNaturalist, which is actually that citizen science thing where I was saying people are taking pictures and submitting them, then you're down to nine species in St. Lucie County, and 3 of them are invasive. So the most highest number of observations is an invasive plant, and this is invasive and that's invasive. And that's a plant from the trade. So there's only about 4 actual native orchids that have been observed in your county. This is the distribution. So each one of these little dots is someplace where somebody's taken a picture of an orchid. If you're interested in looking for wild orchids, that's a good way to find them. And then this is a land use map from your county or from your city office that kind of explains why they have that distribution. So this is all farmland out here. So you're not going to find any orchids out there. And that's indeed what's, goes back to habitat loss. That losing land to farming is better than houses, but it's still not an orchid-rich environment. Tampensis, you've got a lot of. Anybody ever seen this one, Sequoia lanceolata? Yes? This usually grows along roadsides. You can see it in swales and stuff. And this is one I had that was in bloom. You can see it's not in bloom anymore. There's another plant coming up inside there, though. That's the habanero repens from the swimming pool. This is Aspiranthes. There's tons of these around. It's pretty common wildflower kind of thing. Okay, I'm trying to go fast and let people see it. So that's pretty much, you can see that's all over the state. And there's like 6 different species of Spiranthes around. Okay, so this one you don't really have in this county, but we brought some with us today, so I said so close. If you were 1 county up, you would have made it, I think. I think that's you. But this is a really pretty night blooming epidendrum that's native in the southern part of the state that you could try here. And then there's a few that are, if I just get out of your way this way, how's that? Okay, so there's a few that are, yeah, really big too. It's not like I'm missing a little part of the screen, you know? I'm missing like the whole thing. So we have some of these. And this is just a fantastic plant. These leaves, this is a 10-inch pot, so these leaves are 2 feet long easily. This goes up about 4 feet to a beam and then comes down over a huge spray of gorgeous flowers, really nice. We have a bunch of them. Another one, the Certipodium punctatum, also monster, beautiful plant. Vanilla, people grow vanilla. I know we've been talking about vanilla already. We have some cool vanilla. And then as good gardeners, you want to know about the exotics too. So this is one of the invasive ones. This is Eulophiid romania. It's on our Schedule 2 list of invasive plants. It's not a native orchid, it's an invasive orchid. And it's actually the one that has the little corm, grows in the mulch. You see it in mulch a lot, with an egg-shaped corm on the ground. It just throws up a flower spike. Really pretty, almost looks like a tempensis. And then this is the other one that's very common. Beautiful leaves. You know, the leaves are really, really pretty. Yeah, I have these in my yard. I have a lot of stories about these, but I don't have time to tell them, so I'll have to come back. So a couple of tools. So this is what I was talking about before. This is sort of the herbarium that has historical record of all the plants that have been reported into all the different herbariums around the state. And I just look it up. I just use a search engine and say USF Plant Index because I can never remember the URL. But if you're good with long URLs, there it is. And there's many different ways you can search this. It's a great tool. You get a lot of information about each plant. And then iNaturalist is the other application that I talked about. iNaturalist.org is the website. This is a view of orchid sightings in Palm Beach County. So in St. Lucie County, you had about 100 observations in iNaturalist. And here, there were almost 1,000. So you can see it gets a lot of use.
Do you have to pay for iNaturalist?
Pardon?
Do you have to pay?
No, iNaturalist is free. Okay, so here's a story that I don't have time to tell, but it's a really good story. What do you see here? A gorilla?
That looks like a key.
King Kong? Fay Ray? Okay, that's not what iNaturalist saw. That's not what iNaturalist reported. And it's not what all the wildlife people that were emailing me and hitting me on the phone were asking me about. They were asking me about the gorilla observation in Fort Lauderdale. Anyway, tempensis. So that's it. I'm out of here. I do want to recommend a book, Nature's Best Hope by Douglas Talamy. Has anybody read this book already? No? Okay, awesome. It's a great book. He's a great writer, and it will affect your mind on conservation. It's a really wonderful book. If I had more time, I would tell you about it. Thank you.
Thank you.